You're listening to Toronto's #1 real estate podcast, powered by Watson Estates. The most successful local real estate investing starts right here, right now. Here's your host, broker, investor, and social media influencer, Bradley Watson.
Good morning, investors. Bradley here from Watson Estates. Happy Hump Day, August 5th, 2020. Today is a special day for our family. It's my youngest daughter, Hannah's 2-month birthday today. We're going to be celebrating that. It's also a wonderful day to talk about our favorite subject, Toronto real estate. We are #1 on iTunes, Spotify, and Google Podcasts for that subject. And having not done a podcast yesterday, there is a ton of juicy content to share with you today. I'm going to be playing a little bit of catch up, but also gloating in all of the predictions fulfilled. Oh. So today we're going to start off catching up on what I almost did a podcast yesterday. This was really the only big thing that I got out of yesterday's news. This idea of resuming evictions. Now that we've come out of the weekend, Monday obviously was a holiday, so now the Landlord-Tenant Board is reopening and they're listening to evictions as of yesterday, Tuesday. Now, will the City of Toronto government or the municipality save you as a tenant from being evicted by their challenging of Bill 184? We're going to talk about a little how that kind of works, what's going on. And then we're going to get into the real estate. We're going to do a deep dive. What do I need to know about Toronto real estate? I could really shorten that. What do I need to know to real estate in Toronto right now? What are some of the big things that we're paying attention to? And we're going to talk about what the experts have to say at the end of this podcast on whether they believe a housing crash is imminent. And then promptly after filming this podcast, I'm going to go spend some time with my family because, let's face it, it's a birthday. Any excuse to get away from work, right, guys? And I mean, she's 2 months, so what? She eats, she sleeps, she poops, and sometimes she smiles, and you think, oh, it's so cute. And then the fart comes out, and you're like, oh, that was just a fart. But birthdays, you know what they say. They're just a participation award in life. And so today we're celebrating that one thing that goes up and never comes down, your age. And I hope you guys have a wonderful day. I hope you guys had a wonderful weekend. I know I last spoke with you on Monday. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And so I'm so glad we actually, a couple days back, I noticed I Googled Toronto real estate and we popped up on the For You page, which is a TikTok reference, probably old people out there. We were on the For You page of Google. So thank you for listening in, as you guys always do, and making us worth searching for online and sharing the word with your friends. So let's get into the content you came for. We're going to talk about this. There was a Toronto Stories article called Toronto Landlords Can Resume Evicting Tenants. That was a top article of the day, but that's not the one I want to read. I want to read the one that's going to kind of give the compact information and what exactly is going on. And this comes from Global News. That article is called Thousands of Ontario Renters Brace for Evictions as Landlord and Tenant Board Reopens Tuesday. Here's what they say. Ontario's Landlord and Tenant Board is set to begin processing thousands of eviction applications Tuesday as pressure from tenant advocacy groups to try and extend a ban on evictions continues to mount amid COVID-19. Guys, you lost, no? And yet they're lining up, still trying to stop this eviction or continue an eviction moratorium. So fancy. Eviction freeze. This week, we are looking at a situation where the enforcement of outstanding eviction orders and the making of new eviction orders by the Landlord and Tenant Board can continue. I think you're going to get a lot of new applications because they're saying they have 6,000 applications that are currently, we're waiting for the shutdown, most of them being in place before, obviously, everything was terminated or closed in the emergency orders. And the province ended its moratorium on residential evictions in late July. And I think it was like the 28th, we were sitting here and we're saying, like, come on, like the emergency orders didn't get extended. And everything is pointing, once that happens, to say that you can evict as of the beginning of August. And there was no information on this in July. Now, all of a sudden, the long weekend rolls around and we are in August and everyone's playing catch up with the news. Just like we called it on Monday. I told you this week you're going to get news. And sure enough, the next day, there are articles, top articles of the day talking about this. Well, now we're all on the same page. Let's kick those tenants out. There are 6,000, but in Ontario, they say there could be up to 150,000. So this is going to get ugly before it gets pretty. And obviously, there's this Bill 184 that's in place right now, which we'll get to in just a second. But I got to talk to my buddy here, a former adjudicator at Ontario's Landlord Tenant Board. His name is Harry Fine, which I love. I think this is the guy that was the paralegal. Remember, we were like, I want Harry Fine representing me as my paralegal. And he works for a group called Advocacy Center for Tenants Ontario, and they filed a motion to try and extend the ban. Because now it's over, and although no one's talking about it, they're obviously well aware of it, and they were trying to push it, but it got dismissed by the justice over the August long weekend. And this might have been why nobody wanted to talk about it before the weekend, because they were thinking it could still get pushed back, so they were a little late. They were a little late. It was happening behind the scenes. Well, now the sheriff, aka the enforcement officer, can go ahead with enforcing the evictions that have been on hold. The landlord and tenant board can also begin issuing piles of eviction orders that were waiting to go out, and the board is now going to start hearings for evictions, things that haven't yet been heard. The reality is those are going to be so backlogged, and they were already backlogged before, which brings in this Bill 184. Because they're saying, we've got tenant says, I can't pay, I'm getting back on my feet. They say actually that the adjudicator will work with them. It's not like we're just kind of throwing the book at them, but if you sign this Bill 184, sign or opt in to negotiating with your landlord yourself, you can cause yourself a problem. I find it so silly. There was an article that came out from CP24, and they were kind of talking to John Tory, and they were talking about this. He said the city of Toronto may be preparing a possible legal challenge of the Ford government's new tenancy legislation, but that doesn't mean it can stop the possibility of thousands of evictions in the next few months. He said this, I will just say they're an uphill struggle because it's clearly spelled out as an area of provincial jurisdiction. Then you have to make a court application. Oh, you mean like the ones that just tried to prevent and extend the eviction moratorium and how that fell flat on their face? Oh, so the city of Toronto is going to go next. Okay, I gotcha. So we're talking about something here that's unlikely to have an immediate effect, and if I could add to that, or an effect at all. Really, like we're playing catch up here. John Tory is just bending to the crown of the tenant sitting outside his condo. That is what's happening here. That's okay. They'll come to my house. If a tenant refuses the landlord's offer, which is this idea of having an agreement, a repayment agreement made with the tenant and the landlord, you guys do understand they can still take the matter to the board. They are opting, the tenant is willfully opting a repayment plan with their landlord in hopes of modernizing the system and speeding up the process. But they don't have to sign it. But that's not good enough. Apparently that is enough and to have some critics and legal analysts say that it may lead to vulnerable tenants to sign shady repayment plans. Educate your family, guys. Your tenants, you guys have been loud and proud and knowledgeable up until this point. Why all of a sudden are we not in a position to understand the biggest bill that affects you and your rights as a tenant? If you're scared and you don't understand or you don't have legal support with you, just don't sign it. And in fact, your process is going to be so slow to kick you out because of the backlog. Anyways. Okay, we're going to move on. We're going to move right along. I know that's not an article of the day for today, but because I missed it, it was definitely something I wanted to mention yesterday, and that's why I put it at the beginning. But now we're going to start talking about the real estate market. You guys remember a couple weeks ago, I guess it was a week and a half ago or something like that, Move Smartly, they did a conference, and we had kind of mentioned it because someone was asking if I was going to be on it, because apparently I'm famous. And they hosted over 20 hours of top expert interviews online. Those sessions, by the way, are now available if you want to go, and they are on demand. You can go and click them on movesmartly.com. You can click and watch the different sessions. Go for it. But what they're doing here, and what is good enough for me at this point, and as a good recap as our market, is what are some of the big points that they took out of that huge conference? Well, there were 7, and I'm going to kind of graze through. I'm going to share with you what are some of the things being said, and so it'll save you hours and hours of watching video. Number 1, a beach ball bounce back. So they're saying this, and I'm just going to go through some of the highlights from what they've said here. So they've taken the highlights, but I'm getting the highlights of the highlights. I'm taking the MTV boy band highlights. Here we go. Speakers, Jason Mercer, Chief Market Analyst at the Toronto Regional Real Estate Board, and Sean Hildebrand, President at Urban Nation, a leading Toronto condo market research and consulting firm. That's a mouthful. But those two guys suggested that they will likely return to pre-COVID price projections with an average Toronto home price expected to rise to 900,000 and condo prices per square foot to rise by 6.5. Now, condos are up 5% year over year. So if we're going to rise 6.5%, I mean, that's pretty much saying they're calling this the bottom. That's kind of what I'm hearing there for condos. Is that the case? I don't think so. I think it's more than that, but whatever. And this is in like lines up or in direct opposition rather to CMHC, who called for up to 18% price falls. Right? That's what they were calling for. I mean, if you were to sit back right now and you were to look at it, who do you think is closer? Is it those biased damn real estate agents out there that are looking at the market and all they want to do is sell a house and they charge too many fees? Sorry, I went off there. Or is it the CMHC, that's the government, and they're looking out for your back and they want to protect you? You know, they're trying to help you. They're trying to protect the business, trying to protect the industry. Who is it that is calling the shots so far? And I don't think it's a stretch to say it is the real estate professionals that have been right so far. Is that going to change? Possibly. And if it is, it's going to happen, in my opinion, in Q4. Put your seatbelts on. So we're going to move on. That's step one. Actually, as it relates to the beach ball, because the beach ball thing doesn't make sense without this last point. Speaker Francis Donald, global chief economist at Manulife Investment Management, has elsewhere recently likened consumer behavior in the wake of COVID lockdown to that of a temporarily submerged beach ball springing up out of the water. And Hildebrand warned that without a recovery of the normal, longer-term drivers of home prices, including immigration and job and income growth, the market was running, quote, on the fumes. So there you go. That's what it is. So we want to spring back to life, which we've seen a little bit. We want that to keep coming, get back to the surface and overshoot maybe. But what happens if I were to add to it? What happens to a beach ball when it reaches the surface at the velocity? Ooh, big words. At the velocity it shoots out of the water, it goes in the air, but then it got to come back down to the water. And I think that's the stage we're in my opinion. We are up. We've shot out of the water. I think that's already passed. And I think it's going to come back down regardless of jobs and all of that. It needs to come back to a normal. It needs to normalize to where it was before. Number two that they took out of this summit. I know that was a long one. We're not going to do that long on all of them. This number two is this tale of two workers. One explanation by Mercer and other experts on the summit is that the unequal impact of COVID-19 on job sectors, right? And those in the services industry have been hit the hardest. And office workers, they've been able to transition to work. So there's a disconnect, something to keep in mind. They also say that there could, because of the complexities of this job story, it could result in a reduction in incomes, even for those who manage to keep on working in higher end occupations like dentists or university professors. So far, it has been those in the lower industries. It's been the entry level people that normally don't qualify for properties anyways have been affected. But what they're saying is if this continues, the fear and the downward spiral that would happen would be if it translates into higher end occupations. Number three, working from home has driven buyers to outer burbs and cottage country. Recent sales stats show that the 7 hottest municipalities in the GTA with sales up by more than 40% are on average. How far do you think they are from Toronto? 86 kilometers on average. That is so far. Because, I mean, imagine driving 86 kilometers to work. Never going to happen. But who needs to drive to work anymore? And they've got this idea of dense mixed use 15-minute cities. This is this question on what will people do at the end. This is the real question here is, are they going to come back? Are we going to have these dense 15-minute cities? Or are we going to be in the long term? Is this going to be a long-lasting move, a consumer shift, which in my opinion, to buy into right now is a longer bet because there's so many people betting on that right now that things are going to move outwards. That is this is why the stats show that. There's so many people betting that things are going to stay far away. But if you believe that things are going to move back in, as I do, then there's an opportunity in there. Catch the rush, catch the flood as it's leaving. Get that exodus and get in there. All right. And then the second trend that they point out here is this idea, and I love this deleveraging or downsizing your mortgage. And downsizing, it's not just for old people anymore now. It's cool. As my grandfather used to say, you know you're getting old when you go to an antique auction and 3 people bid on you. But you don't have to be old and gray in order to downsize anymore because people are trying to deleverage. They're trying to take the equity that they've got and trying to reduce their mortgage in concern what COVID's going to do to them. And there was another article here that I just wanted to highlight. And funny enough, this was the top article of the day on Google, but not nearly the top of my list. But what the title of that article is Surge of Interest in Rural Real Estate Driven by Young Toronto Professionals Working from Home. And really, I have notes here from the article, but funny enough, it's literally just in the title. That is the point. The point is, without any added stats or any other than maybe discussions with people, like they had one person here from Maffitt Dunlop Real Estate. It's probably the busiest it's been in our firm's memory, and we go back 50 years. And they're talking about deals in like King Township, Caledon, Mono, Orangeville, how it's dirt cheap. They talk about how you can buy a home in Orangeville for around 650, and it goes down 100,000 more if you go further to Shelburne in the mid 500s. But then when you look at other areas like Caledon, Mono, Mulmer, they're saying that's still more pricey, but people are willing to pay the price for that, including young people. And that's where I'm going to leave that article because we don't need to dive in. You guys know this flow of traffic happening, but what's important to notice is not just the old folk. Okay. Number 4 that came from that conference, renting is about to get cheaper, as they say. They say Q2 saw a decline of 3.5 per square foot, with rents dropping further from 7 to 15% in more high-end, expensive areas like Entertainment District, Liberty Village, and City Place. They have been hardest hit, combined with Airbnb, right? And an unprecedented drop in non-permanent resident and foreign student arrivals. This was an interesting point. 25 to 35,000 non-permanent residents arrive in Canada every month. That's kind of the running stat. A number which dropped to 4,000 in April and 11,000 in May. So coming back up, but not nearly what the range is. Since then, most foreign students have been advised not to travel to Canada. No duh, right? And they're doing online, and I've heard a lot of universities talking about it online, and that's going to be the case. So how quick can we get back to people not just investing here, because the foreign investment I'm not so concerned about. It's the non-permanent residents or the people that are moving here that like eventually will come and, you know, they'll stay for as a student visa or a work visa, and then eventually will make Canada their home, because let's face it, once you come here, you don't want to leave, especially when you got the Raptors. Number 5, is the condo market finally about to slow? Everybody's talking about this. In this conference, apparently it was flooded with this idea. Hildebrand, Mercer, and other experts flagged the condo market as facing the biggest number of uncertainties going forward. And we've talked about that too, so I don't need to dive into that. Go back and listen to some of our podcasts and you'll hear that. The scary news right now as it relates to real estate is happening in the condo world. Number 6, debt is a real drag. And this talks about, you know, household debts climbing to rates. In 2008, it was at 176%, and we now have one of the highest household debt to income ratios in the world. We have high debts personally and federally, including deferrals of 16% of Canadian households. Again, information we've covered. What I love about this is it's all reinforcing what we already know, but it kind of recycles it a little bit, and it comes from different angles. And having many experts like this, you get different perspectives. And we're going to talk a little bit about whether they think it's going to boom or crash moving forward in just a second. They also say a longer-term boost for Canada and the Toronto area. Summit speakers were united in their agreement that the Canadian economy and the Toronto real estate market faces an unprecedented, perhaps, quote, the word for 2020, that's what they're calling it, unprecedented, of course, number of risks. Given this, and I'm going to leave this on a bit of a cliffhanger for you, one Summit viewer wondered why some speakers were still bullish on Toronto real estate in the long term. So why are we so bullish, guys? Why? And that is a decision. I am bullish long-term on Toronto real estate. But you need to make that decision yourself, and you need to make your investments accordingly. And that I mean, how you do that is up to you. And before I get into our last point, this idea of the bust, the crash, the bubble popping, blowing out the candles. We're going to talk about this one article because I've had multiple viewers ask me. I got W on YouTube sharing the story that the article is called Bank of Canada is using billions to prop up mortgages. Toronto and Vancouver new condo sales plummet. And as they dive into it, they want to know this idea of the government spending money to prop up mortgages. Waleed said the same thing. Absolutely love the content. Great perspective with realistic analysis. What's your opinion of the Bank of Canada buying up millions in mortgage-backed bonds? Interesting article from Better Dwelling as below. And it very much is an interesting article. And Alex Easton, thank you for your comment. Stop cackling after every sentence. You're better off focusing on substance and stats and avoid sounding like an MTV teen host. Oh, you don't like my highlights? It's hardly a good look. Oh my goodness. Sorry, man. Good vibes only. Moving on. So this Better Dwelling article, Canada's central bank is desperately trying to prop up real estate markets with liquidity. So, okay, I'm going to start off by saying I am not an economist, and yes, I am invested and I am savvy. I'm a savvy investor. I am not in a position, and maybe we can have a guest on our show. I might consider having someone come on to talk a little bit more about what this would look like. It's a very interesting point, though, this idea of Canada mortgage bonds. If you haven't heard about it, you're going to want to listen up. So here's what's going on, okay? Canada mortgage bonds, and you're going to listen to me, and it's going to go in one ear and out the other. That's okay. But I'm going to read for you the description of what is happening, okay? Canada mortgage bonds, CMBs, are debt securities guaranteed by the government of Canada. Okay. Basically, lenders originate mortgages. They group them into a pool. The pool is sold to the government as a mortgage-backed security. And in order to buy these mortgage-backed securities, the government needs to sell the CMBs to investors to generate the funds. The cash flow from the MBS, the mortgage-backed securities, is then used to make payments to investors holding the CMBs. Long story short, the CMBs are a state-secured vehicle for mortgage financing. So the government is making money on one side, they're buying it, they're being pulled together. Okay, you've got these bonds being packaged together and whatever. Okay, that is the basics that you need to know. The main thing that's happening here is since the government of Canada guarantees all CMBs, they pay very little interest on them. In a normal market, when demand rises for CMBs, interest paid falls even further. When demand drops, interest rates typically rise to attract more investment. Simple supply and demand, right? No, not in a country that's going all in on its housing bubble. So the concern here, okay, fine, you got government coming in and stepping in a little bit, but this didn't just happen during COVID. They were actually doing it before. When they said last year, when the market was kind of slowing down, not in Toronto, obviously, but in the rest of the country, they started buying CMBs, the government, the Bank of Canada, which is a bankster's way of suppressing rates. They're trying to bring interest rates down. And this is where it all kind of comes back together. The government right now is trying to, they're taking money from you. You don't really, this is the side that people ignore, through taxation or through future taxation. They're taking the money from us and then they're pouring it into a market in order to stimulate and to bring prices down because they're increasing the demand because they're buying these bonds. And so as that's happening, it'll suppress interest rates and then hopefully cause people to want to invest in real estate, as an example. And that's kind of that's their approach to it. They're getting very hands-on. Well, since COVID happened and starting on March 20th this year, they announced that they would start a buying of on a competitive basis. So they actively now play a role in driving mortgage rates down, and they are spending a ton of money on these bonds. And so here's my thinking on it. If I were to just kind of summarize it, I know that it's a little chaotic, which is why I kind of didn't really do it before, but I know that I'm getting a lot of comments on it. I'm not an economist, but in my opinion, as a free market type of person, this is stupid. They should not be doing this, right? And maybe this is the reason interest rates have been coming down, but there's a lot of uncertainty. What it actually does is it freaks a lot of people out because of articles like this. And it's like, why is the government artificially bringing down rates and blowing money and at our own cost, right? We have to pay for that. Like, that doesn't come for free. That comes from your tax dollars later. And they're injecting all of this money. And I think it's going to have more adverse effects. This article later on goes on to talk about some of the repercussions, including people freaking out and relying on it. It's like crack. It's like you need it, right? It's like you get hooked, and we get hooked on government spending. And bad idea. Bad idea. You want my perspective on it? Bad idea. I think it's a terrible idea. And just because it's our government doesn't mean I need to agree with what they're doing. Government dollars are like birthdays. They feel right, but too many can kill you. And it will. It will kill us. It'll kill us later. All right, so let's talk about, I know I've been kind of hanging this little carrot in front of you guys, a little carrot cake. What is the short-term future of residential real estate? We asked 7 market experts whether a housing crash is on the horizon. And they also do this thing called a crashometer, which is kind of fun. What is a crashometer? I feel like I should need to come up with a number. By the end of this podcast, I'll give you my crashometer out of 10. So this first person, his name is Roloff Van Dijk. Head Canadian analyst at CoStar. I've read him in articles before. I know he's a big wig here. Here's one of the things they said, and I'm going to take again the highlights of the highlights. There's also the issue of delayed home ownership. People will need some time to get their financing back in order to afford a home and get their mortgage approved. The pandemic is causing people to delay getting married or having children, which is typically incentives to buy a property or move into a larger home. With these life stages delayed, so are home purchases. Good point. something we don't talk about. Very good point. I love it. Okay. Jason Mercer, Crashometer. He refused to give a Crashometer. He works for the Toronto Real Estate Board, chief market analyst, one of the most dry personalities on YouTube, but amazing content if you want to stay up to date on what is going on with the facts. Sorry, Jason. We'll get you on our podcast soon. That's how I like to get guests. In our most recent market forecast update, right now there's a certain degree of recovery at hand. I think that would bode well for housing market conditions moving forward. In fact, consumer segments of the economy like housing have often been a leading indicator of recovery. And so, if you look at the kind of numbers that we saw in June with an average home selling price of $930 and more than 8,000 sales, perhaps that points to improving conditions as we move forward. Treb is like a pickle celebrating its birthday. You know, when the market's good, they relish in the moment. And that's the way the Treb goes. Now, Jason, what I love about his content is he is a realist too. And even though he works for Treb, I know he gets a bias, and that's natural. I get that too. But he does. They are covering the condo market quite closely now that it's kind of come to the forefront. Garth Turner, author, financial analyst, he Crashometer 0 out of 10. Some of his main takeaways: these things are temporary. The demand surge will temper. More properties will hit the MLS. Unemployment will stay elevated. Any economic or public health reversal now could make those who overpaid in June regret things in November. But the likelihood of a crash is basically zero. So what you're hearing is you can have people like myself who are pointing to the concerns that are in front of us. And there's a lot of them. There's a nice little list, a nice fat little wish list of challenges we're going to face here in the GTA, but that does not mean a crash. Just because I'm telling you that there is some negative news doesn't mean a crash. A crash is significant. But he does say this, and I don't disagree. If there were a second crash or second wave, however, it would hit the market like an asteroid. Combine that with joblessness, more shutdowns, the condo plop, mortgage. I love how that's a thing now, the condo plop. I should start calling it the condo plop. Mortgage deferral cliff, CMHC rules tightening, and more risk-averse lending. And the market would be a smoky hole in the ground for at least a year until the vaccine, which obviously we don't have any guarantees about anyways. Overall, the best time to buy a house. I love this quote. Oh my God, I love this quote. Quote of the day. Overall, the best time is to buy a house. The best time to buy a house is when you need it and can truly afford it. And the worst time to do that would probably be now. That's so good. That is so good. Best time to buy a house when you can afford it, and ain't nobody affording a house right now. All right, we're moving on. Vic Singh, assistant professor at Ted Rogers School of Management. Crashometer 5 out of 10. And of course has the least depth to it, but his quote that he has here: the one advice I would give to buyers and sellers is be very cautious. You don't want to get into a position where you say, you know what, things are back to normal. I would be very comfortable about overbidding at this point, because what typically happens is when people hear positive news, they become overly optimistic and they go and overbid. Think about your month-to-month budget. Always have a cushion in there, and don't want to be underwater when it comes to home financing. Again, no numbers, no stats, but good advice. And if there's going to be a 5 out of 10, I would not put my number that high. Dana Rena, oh my goodness. I'm sorry, with an R. Their last name starts with an S. Dana Senegama, principal market analyst for the GTA, the CMHC. Crash is a big word. I love how she works for CMHC. Crash is a big word. In terms of a crash, you would imply bigger issues, particularly a glut in supply of units, developers unable to sell them. We don't anticipate such an extreme impact. That said, we're expecting declining average home price and recovery by mid to late 2021. I love how she says her point, but then CMHC is saying this, so I got to stand behind it. And it's like, instead of giving you what is your expectations on a crash, they don't want to say it anymore, so they're defining what is crash or glut. Like, it's like you don't want to give a straight answer anymore. That's okay. Moving on. Christopher Alexander, Executive Vice President and Regional Director of RE/MAX, Ontario, Atlantic, Canada. One of the points he said here that I thought was interesting: there's still so much demand for housing right now that even if we do get a flood of inventory in the market, the demand is going to sustain price levels. What happens once the business subsidy runs out is a bit of a concern, but when it comes to people who are unserved, they aren't typically home buyers. I disagree with that point, but that's okay. The condo market, on the other hand, that's getting into balance, meaning demand is dropping. It will probably end up a buyer's market come September. It's interesting actually to hear RE/MAX saying that. If it was coming from CMHC, I'd be like, okay, that's in line with what they're saying. But it's interesting that RE/MAX is positioning condos as a buyer's market. If anything, it gives it more credibility, because generally they want tighter market, right? And the short-term rental market, which is predominantly condos, has been impacted by COVID. Airbnbs were just wiped out. If you don't have the means to carry the property without renting it, chances are you're putting it on the market and trying to sell it to offload your expenses. Very interesting to see Remax, and I guess this is personal as well, but it's nice to see that they're giving a counterpoint as well. And Tim Hudak, you probably remember that fellow's face, CEO now of the Ontario Real Estate Association, his crashometer is 0.5 out of 10. I think the greater risk than a crash is an affordability crisis, meaning even people with decent incomes can't afford to buy a home. Okay, we're going to have some fun here, guys. All right, this is our last guy. So we're going to say this. He's going to bring up a point that I've been kind of hammering for the last little while. And he represents Ontario Real Estate Association. And if you've missed what their point is this, we need more supply. People can't afford a home. We need supply. That's the deal. That's what we got to do. If the government wants to avoid an affordability crisis, they need to get more supply into the system. They could do that with and then here's where we go off the rails. Okay, because he says we need more supply. And then he says they can do that. Like, did I miss something? They can do that with a land transfer tax holiday. Okay, dude, that's not going to help supply. And by speeding up the approvals process for new homes. Okay, that one does, yes. To give greater choice and more affordability. Oh my gosh. So you're hitting the demand side so hard. And if that wasn't enough, listen to this. I believe the cities are going to continue to grow and flourish. There was a lot of speculation after 9/11 that large cities would see people flee. I think that's a little different, but okay. I suspect the same around the Spanish flu 100 years ago. Okay, you don't know that, but okay. But after short-term turbulence, people continue to want to live in cities, not only for employment reasons, but also because of great culture and the proximity to so many desirable amenities. And I agree. And that's why I think people will come back to the city. That's why I think that's a good bet. But then he says this idea of supply and demand, one of the reasons people don't move is because they get punished with a massive land transfer tax in Ontario, particularly in Toronto, we get a double land transfer tax. If the government were to do away with that tax, both provincially and in the city, that would bring more housing supply into the market. How? Maybe someone can answer me in the comments. How does removing a land transfer tax or deferring a land transfer tax help supply? All it does is stimulate demand. Like, am I missing something, guys? Please put that in the comment if I'm completely off base. I don't get it. I don't understand that point. I think they're just spewing their pitch right now to the Ontario government. And it would keep price increases under control and would have an explosion impact on our economic recovery and employment figures. No, I think it's going to just cause, explosion in price, boosting the price and affecting and hurting affordability. For every home purchase, there's about $80,000 in spin-off for furniture, appliance renovations, and supporting services. Oh, maybe that's his point. This idea, okay, well, if we're buying real estate, there's spin-off purchases, furniture, appliances, renovations. So maybe we're not trying to help the affordability of housing. Maybe we're trying to stimulate and actually worsen affordability, stimulate people to purchase properties in order to do this, make real estate a locomotive that pulls the rest of Ontario's economy on the tracks to recovery. A lot of people would disagree that real estate should not be the single-handed thing that pulls people out of recovery. Well, too little, too late, because that is what's happening. But I don't think that that's going to help our problem. If affordability, if what you say is true and affordability is the issue, which I agree with, that's my stance as well, we don't want to incentivize people and we don't want to make buying easier until we have supply truly addressed. Statistics matter. In my mind, they matter. And so we're going to continue to watch. And this week is a great week for stats because Treb stats are coming out in the next couple days. And statistics show that those who have the most birthdays live the longest. So I'm going to go out and I'm going to have some fun with the girls. Every time we do birthday cakes for these girls, I end up with heartburn. So today I'm going to try something a little different. I'm going to take the candles off and I'm going to let you know how it goes. I'll see you next time. Take care and keep it real.